Hi, friends. Do you ever have a day when you're feeling really happy and your mouth just turns up like this in a big smile? And then maybe you have some days when you're really sad and your mouth curves down in a frown. Well, I have a silly book to read to you about a man who feels like this most of the time, but who meets someone who feels like this. And it's called Mr. Happy. Let's see what happens to Mr. Happy. Here is my book, Mr. Happy, by Roger Hargraves. He's the author, he wrote the words, and he's also the illustrator, which means he drew the pictures. Mr. Happy. On the other side of the world, where the sun shines hotter than here, and where the trees are 100 feet tall, there is a country called Happy Land. Everybody who lives in Happy Land is happy all day long. Wherever you go, you see happy, smiling faces all around. It's such a happy place that even the flowers seem to smile in Happy Land. And as well as all the people being happy, all the animals in Happy Land are as happy as can be. If you've never seen a mouse smile, or a cat, or a dog, or even a worm, go to Happy Land. There's a smiling worm. Even the worms are happy. This is a story about someone who lived there who happened to be called Mr. Happy. Mr. Happy was fat and round and happy. One day, while Mr. Happy was walking through the woods, he came across something quite unusual. There in the trunk of one of the very tall trees was a door. Not a very large door, but nevertheless a door. Certainly a door. A small, narrow, yellow door. Definitely a door. "I wonder who lives here," thought Mr. Happy to himself, and he turned the knob of that small, narrow, yellow door. The door wasn't locked, and it swung open quite easily. What's he going to find inside? Just inside the small, narrow, yellow door was a small, narrow, winding staircase leading downwards. Down, 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 down. Mr. Happy squeezed his rather large body through the rather thin doorway and began to walk down the stairs. The stairs went round and round and down and down and round and down and down and round. Eventually, after a long time, Mr. Happy reached the bottom of the staircase. He looked around and saw there in front of him another small, narrow door. But this one was red. Mr. Happy knocked at the door. "Who's there?" said a voice, a sad, squeaky sort of voice. "Who's there?" Mr. Happy pushed open the red door slowly, and there, sitting on a stool, was somebody who looked exactly like Mr. Happy, except that he didn't look happy at all. In fact, he looked downright miserable. Miserable means very, very, very sad. "Hello," said Mr. Happy. "I'm Mr. Happy."
"Oh,"
sniffed the person who looked like Mr. Happy but wasn't.
"well, my name is Mr. Miserable, and I'm the most miserable person in the world."
"Why are you so miserable?" asked Mr. Happy.
"Because I am,"
replied Mr. Miserable. Mr. Happy thought. "How would you like to be happy like me?" asked Mr. Happy.
"I'd give anything to be happy,"
said Mr. Miserable.
"but I'm so miserable I don't think I could ever be happy,"
he added miserably. Mr. Happy made up his mind quickly. "Follow me," he said.
"Where to?"
asked Mr. Miserable. "Don't argue," said Mr. Happy, and he went through the small, narrow, red door. Mr. Miserable hesitated and then followed. Up and up the winding staircase they went, up and round and up and round and up until they came out into the woods. "Follow me," said Mr. Happy again, and they both went through the woods back to Mr. Happy's cottage. Mr. Miserable stayed in Mr. Happy's cottage for quite some time, and during that time the most remarkable thing happened. Because he was living in Happyland, Mr. Miserable ever so slowly stopped being miserable and started being happy. His mouth stopped turning down at the corners. Look at his mouth. Mr. Miserable's mouth isn't frowning anymore. It's kind of flat. And ever so slowly, it started turning up at the corners. And eventually, Mr. Miserable did something that he had never done before in his life. He smiled. And then he chuckled, which turned into a giggle, which became a laugh, a big, booming, hearty, huge, giant, enormous laugh. And Mr. Happy was so surprised that he started to laugh too. And both of them laughed and laughed. They laughed until their sides hurt and their eyes watered. Mr. Miserable and Mr. Happy laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed. And because they were laughing so much, everybody who saw them started laughing as well. Even the birds in the trees started to laugh at the thought of somebody called Mr. Miserable who couldn't stop laughing. And that's the end of the story, except to say that if you ever feel as miserable as Mr. Miserable used to, you know exactly what to do, don't you? Just turn your mouth up at the corners. Go on. That was Mr. Happy. Now, I have heard a story that if you're feeling kind of sad or even kind of miserable, that if you just smile, even if you don't really feel like smiling, but if you just smile, eventually you'll start to feel less sad and you'll start to feel more happy. So next time you're feeling sad, try it. Try just smiling and see if it helps you feel better. I hope you liked the book. See you next time. Bye-bye.